Hey guys, so just wanted to close out my birthday weekend here to talk a little bit about this week of WWE before we get into anything concerning Raw, SmackDown, or Backlash. Let's take a minute to talk about the list that was put out this just today, and I don't know how accurate this is, how official it is for the tournament for the new heavyweight championship. So, let's start with the names on this list. Okay, Seth Rollins, Sheamus, The Miz, Edge, Rey Mysterio, Shinsuke Nakamura, Damian Priest, Finn Balor, Bobby Lashley, AJ Styles, Austin Theory, and Cody Rhodes. Okay, so in and of itself, I don't have an issue with the names on the list. Okay, I don't. Right? But there are a few that bother me because they went through the process of doing this draft. And the idea being that this new title would be exclusive to whatever brand Roman Reigns was not on, which would be Monday Night Raw. So, if you're going to put together a new title that is supposed to be exclusive to a particular brand, if you're going to do a tournament for this new title, ideally you should only have superstars that were drafted to that brand, right? Because if you're going to do this tournament for that brand, you're going to have those matches for that tournament take place on that show, right? So, just a couple of them that I noticed. Rey Mysterio, Bobby Lashley, AJ Styles, and Austin Theory. All four drafted to SmackDown. So why are they competing for a Raw championship? Unless your idea is that should they win, there's going to be some trade maybe. It makes no sense to me. I don't necessarily like it. Is not the best way to start any kind of split you're doing with this draft. That is the piece of this that I don't necessarily care for. Now, are one of those people necessarily going to win it? Okay, maybe not. But that's not necessarily the point. If you didn't have enough people on that roster specifically to do this tournament, then don't have it be that big of a tournament. That is the issue that I have with this so far. Now, having listed those names, there is a good chance that Seth Rollins will more than likely end up winning this, or potentially Cody, as he is on that brand. They could also go with The Miz. I wouldn't necessarily hate that. But I don't know that he's necessarily one of the top picks for it. More than likely, it is going to end up being either Seth or Cody, is my guess with that. So we've kind of touched on that and my issues with that. So, without further ado, let's go into Monday Night Raw. We started with Triple H coming out announcing the picks for night 2 of the draft. Rhea Ripley being the first to Raw. SmackDown got Austin Theory. Raw selected Seth Rollins. SmackDown selected Charlotte Flair. I like these picks partly because I think what we're going to eventually end up getting is possibly Charlotte Flair versus Bianca Belair. I don't know for sure if we've seen that or not. Someone wants to let me know in the comments. Please let me know. They did notice that, or they did make note that Brock Lesnar has renegotiated his status and is considered a free agent. So he will be able to appear on either show. So that will be kind of fun, and we'll see that come into play, I think, at some point. So we have Paul Heyman come on out. He's looking at this new World Heavyweight Championship, alluding to Roman wanting that title. We will see what happens there. I really hope that they do not go that route, because he already has two that we don't really get to see that often. That has kind of become a mockery, to be honest, because of the way that they allow him to keep winning with interactions by Heyman, rest of the bloodline. I don't necessarily like it. So, while Heyman is still out there, Seth Rollins comes out, and he is rubbing it into Paul that he is the only one that Roman hasn't beat, because in their championship match, Roman didn't win. He lost via disqualification, so he still hung on to his title, but he did not win. And that still has to eat at Roman. It does. And I think eventually we're going to get back to that story. I don't know that Rollins is necessarily the one that dethrones him. For a while I thought that was maybe the route that they were eventually going to go. But probably not. So, Heyman gets a phone call, supposedly from Roman, to set up a match between Rollins and Solo. I am looking forward to this. That was going to end up being the main event. That is going to be good. So we end up getting then Liv Morgan and Raquel taking on Bayley and Dakota Kai. This was an okay match. Not necessarily great. Bayley and Dakota end up picking up the victory. It gets them on the card, and it gives them that momentum to continue on in the tag team division, and gives them a reason to potentially go after the tag team titles. What is interesting is also, though, that they will be on separate brands, because Damage Control was drafted to SmackDown, while Liv Morgan and Raquel were drafted to Raw. Now, whoever the women's tag champions are, they'll be going back and forth, because that will be defended on either show with women's tag teams on both shows. So, that's not necessarily a problem. And I think we are still easily going to see these sort of matchups. And the other thing with this, though, is that Damage Control did kind of need this win. They've been on a losing streak, so to speak, lately. So I think this was a good call to give them this victory. We then have Ricochet and Braun Strowman taking on Alpha Academy. It was an okay match. It got these tag teams on the card. Strowman and Ricochet defeated the Alpha Academy. This did not sit well with Maxine Dupree. But it got them on the card. It kind of gives Strowman and Ricochet a little bit of momentum, maybe in that tag team division. Alright, we continue with the draft. Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn go to Raw. Now this next one surprised me somewhat. The Usos were drafted to SmackDown. I say this surprised me because I honestly thought that they were going to end up splitting the bloodline to some extent, because of the loss by the Usos to retain or to get back their titles. I thought that was what was going to happen. I thought there was maybe going to be some strings pulled by Roman or Paul Heyman to get them moved to the other brand. That did not happen. Raw ends up selecting Judgment Day. SmackDown selects the Latin World Order. So they will be going their separate ways, and we are probably not going to really be getting that matchup as much. That will be kind of good because it's getting a little old. Alright, we have more interaction between Brock Lesnar and Cody Rhodes. I don't know why. I don't remember which one was in the ring. I feel like it was Brock Lesnar that was in the ring calling out Cody, and he surprised him coming up behind him. So, kind of I maybe got you a little more excited for the match at Backlash. Did a little bit for that. More draft picks now. We had the Morgan and Raquel to Raw. Asuka to SmackDown. So, with Asuka being drafted to SmackDown and Bianca already being there, we could get another match there. Keep in mind that Charlotte is not there yet. She's still taking some time off. So they're going to need to take up that space somehow there. So we could still get some more interaction between Asuka and Bianca. We'll see what happens there. We'll have to see between Monday Night Raw tomorrow and this Friday on SmackDown where we go with the titles. While we're talking about that, let's take a moment to discuss the title changes that are probably coming up. Now, we won't see anything necessarily between Austin Theory and Gunther because they're not necessarily brand specific. So it's easy enough to have that same title go from one to the other. So Theory will take the United States Championship to SmackDown, and Gunther will take the Intercontinental Championship to Monday Night Raw. Easily enough done. What causes some issues is the women's titles and what they end up doing there. Now, because there isn't some actual issues between Bianca and Rhea, that should go somewhat smoothly, or at least with respect to some extent. The last time they did the draft, we saw some issues between Becky and Charlotte, who were the champions at that time that were drafted to the opposite brands. I still don't know necessarily how I feel about them just doing a swap of titles. There may be some other ways they could have gone about getting the titles and keeping them on the respective brands. We then had the New Day getting drafted to Monday Night Raw. And the Brawling Brutes, that being Sheamus. So there is the other one to SmackDown that is in that list that I was brought up before, Sheamus. So he was drafted to SmackDown with Pete Dunne and I don't know why I can't think of his name. I don't know why I can't think of his name. I'm gonna look it up. Ridge Holland. Sorry that he's really good talent. I like the guy. So they're going to SmackDown. So that should be somewhat interesting. This could give Sheamus his opportunity to go after Roman. It's something that has been somewhat hinted at. And some people have expressed some interest in seeing that. Okay, so this is actually, we now actually get to the moment where Lesnar is actually going to the ring and trying to call out Cody Rhodes, which he did. Okay. And that was, I mean, it was a good segment. It was. So then we have Matt Riddle taking on Jimmy Uso. So Jay ends up being booted from ringside. There was some shenanigans, I think, between him and Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. So at any rate, Jay gets booted from ringside, and now Jimmy is on his own against Riddle. It was a okay match. It wasn't great. I mean, it gets things kind of going towards their match at Backlash. Not bad. So we then had a segment with Miz TV with Shinsuke Nakamura. This was not necessarily well received. He was the whole purpose was having Shinsuke essentially continue that punchline of the whole Miz having tiny balls segment that they've done before. Not necessary, and I don't know that it really did anything for either of them. We then have the next round for the draft. Trish Stratus drafted to Raw. Makes perfect sense, as they are going to be continuing that storyline with her and Becky. To do that, you need her over there, right? I have to check something. One moment. Okay, so Shinsuke was drafted to Monday Night Raw. And Karrion Kross was drafted to SmackDown, which is interesting. So SmackDown receives Karrion Kross and Scarlett. This is interesting, as they have started to build this feud between Karrion Kross and Shinsuke, which is hard to do if they are drafted to separate brands, but they could try to cross brand lines there. Would not surprise me. So we had then Shayna Baszler and Ronda Rousey drafted to Raw. This could get interesting. So first of all, the tag team champions were drafted to Raw. That being Liv Morgan and Raquel. So this could be a way to get that more interaction between them there. It could also be interesting to see if they do something between Ronda and Becky, now that they're going to both be on the same brands again. We'll see what they do with that, if they pick up pieces of that at all and bring that history into the mix. It's interesting that they didn't keep, at the very least, Ronda on SmackDown. Fox seemed to be very vocal about wanting her on that brand. We will see what happens. So we have LA Knight then drafted to SmackDown. We will see what they do with him over there and what matches they end up coming up with for them. Alright. The next segment was just a squash match for Omos ahead of his match against Seth at Backlash. I mean, it wasn't an absolutely terrible match, but I don't know that it was absolutely necessary. I think at this point you could have had some more interaction between Seth and Omos, actually, instead of trying to build up the match with him squashing others. Okay, so the next draft picks were Ricochet and Braun Strowman drafted to Raw. Shotzi drafted to SmackDown. That could be interesting. We had Bronson Reed drafted to SmackDown. And this last one is going to be fun. Pretty Deadly from NXT drafted to SmackDown. I can't necessarily say that they have been one of my favorites from the little bit of NXT that I've been able to catch. But I think it's going to be kind of interesting. And we will see what they can do. We then end up getting a mixed tag match between Damian Priest and Rhea Ripley and Rey Mysterio and Selena Vega. So this kind of starts to get into setting up the match, at least not necessarily. I can't necessarily say a lot of it for Backlash. I mean, part of it because we're going to see Damian Priest and Bad Bunny, who has kind of aligned himself with the Latin World Order. So, I mean, it kind of it sets up a little bit more between Zelina Vega and Rhea Ripley and their uh, SmackDown Women's Championship match at Backlash. So Judgment Day ends up defeating the Latin World Order. I kind of feel like this kind of needed to happen. And Judgment Day has not necessarily been winning a lot lately. So I feel like that did kind of need to happen. So we should have some final picks. Actually, these may have been the picks from after the show, possibly. Because the match should have closed out the show. So, at any rate, Rollins ends up defeating Solo via disqualification, of course, by the Usos, who were essentially, it appears, called in by Paul Heyman. It was a fun match. It was kind of neat to see these two in the ring together. I think it was the right call to have it a disqualification, because at this point you don't want to have Solo defeated, as he has had that undefeated streak, but you don't necessarily want to see him beat Rollins either. So this kind of sets up that idea that neither Solo or Roman could beat him, that they needed to get disqualified in order to actually do anything with him. So let's go over the last picks. We had Alpha Academy drafted to Raw, Rick Boogs drafted to SmackDown. Then we had another call-up. We had Katana Chance and Caden Carter. So let's talk about this particular call-up, because we have already had Indy Hartwell, the NXT Women's Champion, called up. That's not necessarily terrible, because they've already decided how they're going to handle that situation. She relinquished the title. They already took care of that. Now, the issue is the tag team titles, because the current women's tag team champions on NXT were set to have a title match against Katana Chance and Caden Carter. I don't know. That may have already happened. I haven't had a chance to really keep up with NXT and exactly when that match was supposed to happen, but irregardless who you have win that match, they're not going to be in NXT anymore. So it would have made more sense to have the contenders for that title be someone that's actually staying on NXT. I'm going to have to look more into that and see exactly what their goal is going to end up being there. Because it really didn't make a whole lot of sense to have that championship match against two teams that weren't going to be there. So for the last pick, we had Cameron Grimes going to SmackDown. I actually like Cameron Grimes. I think he's kind of a fun character. Let's move on to SmackDown, shall we? I think that's a great idea. Okay. So. We have Rey Mysterio kicking off the show. I don't remember if this was to set up. Okay, so we ended up getting. So we're gonna end up getting Rey Mysterio versus Zelina Vega, and Dominic Mysterio and Rhea Ripley. It is the match that we are going to get. That's gonna end up being the main event, so that set that up nicely though. It made kind of a lot of sense. We then saw Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson taking on the Viking Raiders. This gets the OC back on TV, which is nice to see, including AJ Styles and Mia Yim, Mi Chin. Okay, so I don't necessarily know how much I like them adding the whole Mi Chin to the Mia Yim, but it's fine. I'm sure there's a goal in there somewhere for that. So, Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows end up defeating the Viking Raiders. This got both teams on the card. Kind of showcased them a bit. I think it was the right call to give Anderson and Gallows that momentum to come back. I like that they had Michin and Valhalla get involved kind of with each other there. I would like to potentially see a match between those two women eventually down the road. I think it would be a fun match. So then we had Bianca Belair coming out as she is switching brands. So this makes sense for her to visit what will be her new brand. So Io Sky, Bayley, and Dakota Kai come out. They interrupt her. We then do get Raquel Rodriguez and Liv Morgan coming out, and that sets the stage for a 6-woman tag match, maybe. I don't remember whether I don't think we actually get that. But it set up that potential anyway. We then see the Street Profits taking on Imperium. This was a fun match. It got both over, right? Or at least it got both on the card, which was nice. So Imperium is going to Raw. The Street Profits are back on the blue brand. So this was a fun match because it's not something we're probably going to get to see for a while. So that was kind of neat. It wasn't necessarily a great match, but it got them on the card. The Street Profits end up winning against Imperium. This gives them that momentum. But eventually, they are going to end up splitting Dawkins and Montez Ford. I don't know when that happens, but we'll see. So things got interesting as we end up getting some interaction between the Usos and Solo in the back room, where essentially Solo just warned them that they better make sure that they do their jobs at Backlash. We then had a promo by Cody. I'm not... I don't... so he was on the show essentially promoting the match for Backlash. But and it was a good promo, do not get me wrong, but I don't know that that was necessarily the right place for it on SmackDown. But it was okay. It was, I mean, it was continuing to get people invested in what would eventually be the closing of the show for Backlash. So we then get Shinsuke Nakamura versus Karrion Kross. This was fun because we are going to now not get to probably see this really again, as they are going to different brands. And we should not be seeing them cross brands. This was a decent match. Nakamura ends up picking up the victory over Kross, which I thought was interesting. It was a decent match. It got both of them on the card. And when you had already had some of that interaction between them, you needed to somewhat finish things. It is kind of a weird finish, though, because it doesn't really bring any closure necessarily to the feud, but that's okay. Excuse me. Next, we ended up getting the final match for the show. Rey Mysterio and Zelina Vega taking on Dominic and Rhea Ripley. We had Rey Mysterio and Zelina Vega picking up the victory. This was the right call for this. So, to be perfectly honest, and this ties in with Backlash, so I'm going to kind of talk about that Backlash match while we discuss why this somewhat needed to happen. So, I was excited to see Zelina Vega getting a championship opportunity. Having said that, I did not really see her actually coming away with a victory over Rhea Ripley. Which she did not. But she ended up getting a good showing, though, at Backlash. She did. She did end up getting the victory on SmackDown, which really just gives her that momentum that says, yes, I do deserve to be in this match. This was fun, as after the match, of course, there was the beatdown, as there usually is. But the LWO comes out with Bad Bunny. So that was a way to kind of get that built up some more. So let's go ahead and talk about that match. So Zelina Vega did a very good job at Backlash, right? I don't think people were necessarily expecting her to win, but she put on a very good showing against Rhea Ripley. So I just want to say that for that Backlash match. But let's go back to the other women's match, Bianca Belair and Io Sky. So let me just say that this was a good match. It was hard hitting. What some did not care for was a particular moment close to the end, it was a one-handed hold that Bianca had. It looked like Io landed not necessarily the way she was supposed to, as though Bianca maybe let her down a little earlier than she'd intended or something. Thankfully, Io was not hurt. And there are several different reasons that this could have happened. And it's not necessarily completely on Bianca, right? Both performers really have to have timing down properly. Any timing difference between either one could mean things like this happening. So I think a lot of people putting a lot of that on Bianca wasn't necessarily fair, so to speak. It was still a decent match. And a lot of people are putting the blame on Dakota Kai and Bayley as well for costing Io the match when they were trying to provide a distraction. We'll see how that plays out on SmackDown as far as the interactions between Bayley, Dakota Kai, and Io Sky. Io, of course, giving off this impression that she's kind of getting tired of Dakota and Bayley. Okay. The next match was Omos and Seth Rollins. I didn't know whether I was going to like this match or not, but it actually wasn't that bad. Having Omos in there against Seth actually really did a lot of good, I think, for Omos. Seth Rollins ends up picking up the victory. And I think that's going to really... I think that was the right call because it's going to propel him to where he needs to be to potentially go after that title. I don't know that Omos was not drafted. So he's considered a free agent. Right. So we could still see some more between them. Probably not. I don't think. If they're smart, I don't know that they'll continue that whole feud. So let's talk a little bit more about this Rhea Ripley and Zelina Vega match, because this was Zelina in front of her people, right? Where she comes from, back home. Her family is there. One thing that I was looking for, though, that I did not see when she was going by the crowd and saying hi to her family, I did not see her husband, which is interesting, although he is busy in AEW, so that could potentially be why we did not see him there. But you could definitely see the pride in the crowd for Zelina. We then had the United States Championship match. This ended up being a triple threat between Theory, Bronson Reed, and Bobby Lashley. This was a decent match for the United States Championship. It was good to have a triple threat match, and especially with these three competitors. With Bobby being drafted to... Oh, was he drafted to... He was drafted to SmackDown. Okay. So they still could have put that on Bobby Lashley if they had wanted to. They didn't. That's okay. What I think is going to be fun here, though, guys, since Austin Theory is going to be on Raw, or SmackDown rather, sorry, and is still the United States Champion. One thing that I would like to see, that I'm hoping we get, is some interaction between him and Grayson Waller. Whether that be some kind of teaming up for the two of them, or some kind of feud between the two. I would like to see that, because I think that would be fun with those two. So moving on, we already talked about Rhea Ripley and Selena Vega. We then move on to the street fight. Bad Bunny and Damian Priest. This was a fun match. It really was. I liked it. So we did end up getting another Canadian Destroyer from Bad Bunny, which is fun. He has been one of those guys that has not necessarily been a wrestling guy, that has gone all out to train and learn the business and understand what it means to be in the business and put in the work that needs to be done for it. So, one thing to keep in mind, guys, when someone like Bad Bunny comes into WWE to do a spot like this, and I was thinking about this as I was watching that match, because when you look at some of the bumps that this guy is taking, understand that he has other obligations, right? He may have concert dates, other things that he's going to need to be at, take part in, that he still needs to be in that peak condition for, right? This is someone whose main focus is music, right? And entertaining people in the music industry. If he has tour dates set up, that kind of thing, anywhere, he needs to be in peak physical condition to do those shows. He cannot afford to necessarily have a serious injury in something like this that's going to end up taking him out potentially in some of those shows. So the fact that he's still willing to put in the time and effort to make sure that he can still put on a good show, go all out, while learning to do it safely, is great. I like this about Bad Bunny. They ended up bringing Carlito and Savio Vega, which is fun. I liked it. I liked the figure 4 lock. To Priest, I liked that Bad Bunny brought that in. And not something that I necessarily thought that I was going to expect to see from him. So that was fun. Alright. So that, I mean, it was a fun match. It was. I enjoyed it. I really did. Bad Bunny ends up picking up the victory there over Damian Priest, which I think is what needed to happen. Both of them were in their home country, so I mean, for either guy, that was important. And I think that that's why it had to be the street fight, and I think that's why it got the attention that it did, and the reaction from the crowd that it did. So we then have the Usos and Solo Sikoa taking on Matt Riddle, Sami Zayn, and Kevin Owens. This was a fun match. It was interesting. You see these subtle things when it comes to the Bloodline, which did end up picking up the victory here. What you see is little things that Solo will not do that that let you know that he is not entirely sold on his brothers. So you did see, so Solo saved his brother from a pin, but Solo then did almost hit Jay with a Samoan spike. And this is where you see some of that tension again too. Because even though they picked up the victory, you could see the stare from Jay questioning his brother. Why would you even act like you were considering doing that to me, right? It was a decent match, and I think those little pieces are going to play a big part when they do eventually split the bloodline, which they will. I feel like they definitely will. It is a matter of time. And planting these seeds now, little by little, is what they need to do there. So the last match was Brock Lesnar versus Cody Rhodes. This was a decent match. People question the way in which he won, though. So Brock had the Kimura lock on, but the way in which Cody won was he rolled Brock Lesnar over so that his shoulders ended up on the match. And so that's how he ends up getting the pin. It had some decent spots, which helped it to be a good, well-rounded match. You did see at the end that Brock Lesnar was bleeding. It was a decent match. It was the right call to have Cody ended up picking up the victory. I don't know where this goes from there for them. I think Cody had to pick up the victory here as a way to say, if Roman can beat Brock, I can too. This was just one of those things that I had to do on that road, right? The show itself, I think, was fun. I think because of the matches that you had and the way that they presented some of those hometown heroes, so to speak, was perfect to really get this crowd going and get them invested in it. I know this one ran long, but I think we had a lot to talk about with the Backlash pay-per-view or premium live event in there. I think it was important to kind of talk about some of that stuff. I don't really know that any of the things from this premium live event are going to necessarily lead toward any more storylines per se, because we're going to start seeing different storylines being set up now because the draft picks are taking effect. So those rosters will now begin to take effect starting tomorrow night, so Monday night. We'll get an idea of what the storylines are going to be coming out of this. Alright, we will see you guys next week. Have a good night.